Hi, everyone. Welcome to Nashville. I have the distinct pleasure of going last, so I like that. So firstly, I have a lot of thank yous in my heart. Firstly, to our veterans, thank you for your sacrifice and service. Also, you're going to see a common thread in this presentation about thank you to the engineers that are going on this journey at Columbia Sportswear. Also, we've been helped along the way with a lot of mentors in the DevOps community, so a lot of thank yous to those mentors that really didn't have to go out of their way to help us, but they did. And that's something we haven't talked a lot about at this conference yet, but with the background of open source, you see a lot of sharing between companies and between disciplines, and I think that's super awesome. Finally, what we're going to get into in the presentation, I have some thank yous to the universe. We've benefited quite substantially from serendipitous events, which we'll get into, and that's what makes this all worthwhile, is having people actually surprise you from time to time and getting more than you actually asked for. So we have the title of the talk being the first 500 servers, our DevOps-ish journey at a Microsoft enterprise. I say DevOps-ish because there's definitely some aspects of DevOps in our thing, but as we've heard in this conference and other places, sometimes you have to actually make it your own to make it relevant and appropriate for your own environment. So that's what we're going to talk about. As you'll probably also understand, I'm not a paid professional speaker, so it's actually, one of my hard things in life is to get up and speak. And, I'm asking the engineers at Columbia to go outside their comfort zone, and it's important to me to role model for them, myself going outside that comfort zone. I'd love to see them on stages like this in the coming years, and so providing that positive example is important to me. Which is really consistent with that growth mindset that we've heard a lot about. Microsoft DevOps, I think we can all agree, definitely underrepresented in the DevOps kind of literature. You'll typically see Linux, or you'll also see AWS or Azure, a lot of cloud stuff for DevOps. Microsoft, what you'll typically see is maybe someone spinning up an IIS server and saying, hey, isn't that awesome? What we're actually going to show here is I do believe that you can actually have some dramatic impacts in a Microsoft-oriented enterprise, and we're going to get into some of the patterns there. Has everybody heard of the Etsy Day One Deploy process? Okay, so if you haven't, basically what they say is on day one at Etsy, we have appropriate rigor in our tooling, we have appropriate process, we have high hopes and expectations for our new hires. So on day one, you're expected to make a change to the production system. That should scare us to our cores, but although it's highly aspirational, I think it's also kind of a shining star, because what that gets at is really reducing the friction in your own company, reducing the friction in terms of dependencies and processes and things like that. Quick story, I went to a wedding once upon a time, and this was a special wedding. It had some of my good friends in it, but what was really interesting is that the bride really liked dessert. And so at her wedding, she said, you know what, I'm going to serve dessert first. So I'm going to emulate that. I'm going to actually give you the punchline, and then we're going to work back through the presentation to see how we got here. So this is Kelsey Hightower. If you haven't caught Kelsey, he has some wonderful live demos. Tetris, he's doing a lot of demos on Kubernetes. So I am going to take a page out of his book and attempt to do a live demo. We said that we should do some hard stuff at the beginning and role model that. I'm going to try and do a live demo. And what I'm going to try and demo is our day one process. And this is going to be fun because I can't see the screen. All right, we have some PowerShell, which I really can't see the screen. Sorry about that. I should have really practiced this beforehand. for you. And Kelsey would say, if he was here, that this is completely serendipitous. It's awesome to have problems. So, okay, we're back, and I can see the screen. Okay, I'm going to start off this demo with going into our Slack channel here. And what we have in our Slack channel, I have a B&A demo Slack channel set up, but what we have in our normal kind of new hire area is we pinned the instructions for what you're supposed to do. So let me grab this here. The beauty of live demos. Okay. Okay, thank you. We'll try again. Part of the fun of this, while I'm trying to get this going, the resolutions are also not helping me, so I can't see the bar. Okay, so this is just a one-liner. It's going out to our Artifactory repo. It's pulling down some of the commands here, and what we're going to do is we're going to spin up Artifactory. We're going to get Chocolatey running. We're going to use PoshGet, which is super awesome if you use a lot of PowerShell. We're going to ultimately configure Git on my machine, as well as the Git credential manager. It's pretty quick. I've practiced this. While we're doing that, I think I will show you, or I'll at least get signed into this. So we use Hubot for our chat ops. And so in our little demo here, what we want to achieve is hello world in our chat ops environment. Okay, so what we see here is I've connected to Git. It's pulled down the repo for our Hubot, which is what we call our chat ops, or our chat ops repo, and we're essentially ready to rock and roll, which is pretty awesome. Again, when you have new hires, helping to reduce the friction, helping them to have a positive experience, they're not, feeling super frustrated on day one, I think is important. Okay. So here's our Hubot repo in GitLab. What we're going to do is we're going to create our hello world. And I'm going to look at my notes because I'm not completely crazy. Okay, so I'm spinning up a simple PowerShell. Can everybody see that okay? Okay, what I want to do is I want to create a script. That way at my command line in Slack, I can not easy to do this. So thank you for bearing with me. Okay, that should work. We will test it. Oh, I wanted to mention one thing real quick. So coffee scripts, which are kind of the lingua franca of Hubot, they can be a little bit intimidating at first. One of our engineers actually put a wrapper. That way, if you can present it reasonably formed PowerShell, it gets wrapped kind of just in time, which we'll get into in the build process, and you get a coffee script out of that. So again, to reduce friction for people that are coming to this. So I'm going to add this to our repo. One more time. Yes. Okay, Okay, so because I planned ahead, sorry about that, I do have it recorded, and we will so sorry about that. All right. Can't see my mouse now. This is awesome. Way to go, Kelsey. But definitely do this in real life. Okay, so we have spun up PowerShell. We've logged in. This is what should have happened. I did my hello BNA. Okay, write output. I did all that. This actually worked this time. I added my file. I logged into my GitLab. And then once I get into Hubot, this is actually super interesting. We're using a CI runner in Hubot to be able to push this into the server. So rather than log into our Hubot server, which we'd never want to do, we actually use a pipeline to do that. And so we can kind of see all that happening here in GitLab. The net effect of all this is we can test for syntax errors, et cetera. That way we don't blow up our Hubot server, which is super not what you want to do when you start having people use the chat ops. Okay, now we're actually into the demo channel. And, okay, so I issued hello BNA Elvis, and it should come back with, if I can. So our robot, it's funny. We have a Street Fighter theme going on in our chat ops, which is awesome. So we call our robot Ryu. So Ryu came back and said, hey, hello Elvis, welcome to Nashville. So that's what should have happened. I apologize for not being able to pull that off. I'm sorry, Kelsey. I have more live at the end, and that will go well, I promise. Okay, so essentially that's what we want our new hires to do. That way they're already joining our community. They're already starting to work in a way that we do, and it's fun. Okay, so here's most of the infrastructure engineering teams at Columbia. I'm Scott Nasello, and I'm lucky enough to be able to lead the teams and be able to work with them on a daily basis. We had a conversation earlier on what types of, what are people doing in organizations. So this infrastructure engineering team really spans the gamut. We have server engineers, storage engineers, virtualization, backup and recovery, iSeries. So just about everything that you can imagine a modern enterprise having to do. We have in here. We're a 78-year-old company, so when you ask me if we're running X, yes, and we probably have 2 or 3 extras that we don't even know about. So, yeah. I'm lucky enough to go on the ride with the team, and it's really that getting back to that serendipitous thing. It's almost like on on a daily basis, something new happens, and the team is surprising me and really turning into that empowered team that's leaning into the transformation that we want to see, and they're actually, being opportunistic. This is me again. So I see my job there in the red as helping engineers to reach their full potential. And then the second part is building that high-performance learning organization with a focus on infrastructure as code. So that's how I spend most of my time. Yes, there's all kind of tech involved in a DevOps transformation, but again, that's where I spend 90% of my time is on one of those two things. Okay, so Gene Kim. We talked about the godfather and grandfather of DevOps yesterday. If you haven't read the Phoenix Project, of course, you should read that. My introduction with Gene was kind of funny. I was a substitute attendee at a Society for Information Management talk, and my mind was blown. I came mainly from the application side prior to infrastructure, and although I'd read the goal and I'd implemented a lot of supply chain planning systems, what he was really talking about with the 3 ways was pretty interesting. I felt like Neo in the Matrix, so instead of Morpheus, we have Gene Kim, and he's saying, I never told you it was going to be easy, I just told you it was going to be true, and I think that's really what we see in this effort. Once you have your eyes opened, it's really, what are you going to do about that? And so in my case, I bought a whole bunch of Phoenix projects. I distributed them to anybody that would listen to me at Columbia, and that's kind of how our journey started. Getting into mentors, this is Rob Cummings from Nordstrom. Sorry, he's a little bit cut off here. If you haven't seen this talk, super important. I think we sometimes want things to come easy as we're getting going on our DevOps journey, and there's certainly a time and place for that, but there's going to be some hard stuff too. And having an appreciation for the hard times is important. That way you don't run for the hills when you start getting into that trouble. And his point in this presentation, changing an enterprise is hard. And oh, by the way, it's okay, and it should be hard. You wouldn't want your company to kind of change and just be super shiny object focused and go from thing to thing to thing to thing. That would create a lot of chaos, and you probably wouldn't be in business very long. The good thing is that the enterprise is optimized for incremental change. So you can actually use that to your advantage. Introduce small changes into the ecosystem, kind of understanding using good Deming plan, do, check, act kind of methodology. If it works, do a little bit more of that. If it doesn't work, you kind of back away from that. And the lesson on this slide is really find mentors. Find mentors that are maybe a little bit further ahead in your journey than you are, and hit them up. I've never been told no, and asking companies, hey, can you spend a little bit more time with us? Can we get on a conference call, get our engineers talking? So I encourage you to do the same. Okay. Jeffrey Snover. Jeffrey Snover, if you don't know him, the father of PowerShell. It was called Monad back in the day. He is the principal engineer at Microsoft, technical fellow. He's the highest ranked engineer at Microsoft. I've used him as my engineer whisperer since I'm coming from a Microsoft use case at Columbia. Helping to really get someone that has deep credibility with your technologies, and helping him to kind of reinforce some of the messages that I'd like to send. You can see all of these things on the right here are tweets that he sent. So the next button being a fast track to IT Pro irrelevancy. When you click a GUI, it's really hard to share the output of that click. He also talks at length in Arrested DevOps number 30, DevOps in Microsoft World. Most of what we see in the Microsoft use case is these install guides that are like a ream and a half, and it's screenshot after screenshot after screenshot. And so if you have that kind of scenario where it's just a whole bunch of screenshots, it's really hard to test that. And if you have multiple environments, dev, QA, staging, et cetera, I can almost guarantee you don't have the same configuration across those environments. So his point in this is, hey, PowerShell can help you to create the artifacts that you can do testing. You can use pipelines, and you can actually share that. You could actually have a new hire and say, hey, here are the scripts that actually configure this thing. The last quote I really like: if you want to be done with learning, get into forestry. If you're in IT, you're riding the tiger, and you need to be ready for constant renewal. So to have someone, in our case, deeply involved in the Microsoft community, being able to kind of convey those same points, don't discount the expert eyewitness. Okay, so we come out of Jeffrey Snover saying we need to change how we're doing our work because automation is really where we need to be as a Microsoft community. We can have a different kind of conversation with our engineers. You've been doing this kind of work in the past, and let's work together to create a win-win. So let's find things that are going to be good for your enterprise or your business, but also good for the engineers. And so it's this idea of how do we help move them outside their comfort zone? How do we kind of bump them along? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. As with most change efforts, instead of seeing the slide where we saw all the engineers as one kind of uniform kind of collection of people, if you can see them as individuals, they're all going to have different strengths and weaknesses. They're going to have different capabilities. And being able to understand what is it that is going to speak to each of them, that's going to compel them to actually move to a different state. That's super important. And we talk a lot about empathy. We haven't talked a lot about it at this conference, but in the DevOps movement, having empathy for your engineers and what it is that you're asking them to do, to go on this journey, to go from the state where you have these install guides that are 300 pages, and we want to do the DevOps. That's a pretty large journey to kind of commit to. And if you don't have empathy and you say, hey, we need to go do all this tomorrow, and the change effort is too much, you're probably going to have people that prematurely kind of quit on themselves, and they're not going to kind of lean into the change the way you want. So it's really this idea of having calibrated expectations, because one size certainly doesn't fit all. This is Admiral Rickover. Super in line with the quality kind of ideas of Deming. One of the things that you probably don't know about him, father in the nuclear Navy, he really kind of transformed the culture of the nuclear Navy as he built that up too. He took people from the surface fleet and moved them into this new realm in which safety and quality were so super important. And one of the things I like here, your good ideas are not going to be adopted automatically. And I deal with a lot of salespeople in my current job, and one day I was thinking, gosh, I'm glad I'm not in sales, because it would just really stink to be in sales. But then I started thinking about it. I think we're all in sales. If you are a practitioner of DevOps, if you're a leader, we're salespeople too. We're selling ideas. And if we can't connect the benefits of what we're trying to do to the individuals, you're not going to be successful. And then the idea here being you have to drive your practice with courageous impatience. You're going to get some objections along the way. You're going to get things like, I don't need to spin up 100 servers in a day. Why do I need this DevOps? You're also going to get things like, hey, we're not Etsy, Flickr, Facebook, Google, any of those guys. It just doesn't apply to us. Oh, we're Windows. Also doesn't apply to us. You're also going to get objections when you start talking about, hey, we should start moving away from RDPing into servers or SSHing into servers, because it's not a great practice, and it's going to be a recipe for drift. Or some companies have a tip jar. Anytime they have to SSH into a server, they put $1 in there or $5 in there. Other companies actually say, hey, if you SSH or RDP into a server, that server is on death row, and it's going to get rebuilt in 24 hours. No questions asked. So you're going to get a lot of objections from your team, especially in a Windows context, like, hey, none of this stuff really applies to us. But if you persevere and you work using a minimum viable process, which I think is super important here. Don't try and boil the ocean. Again, Windows engineers are coming from this idea of monolithic tool familiarity instead of these tool chains. So it's going to be tempting to give them all the DevOps all at one time. Well, I would say give them one tool and let them start to connect those together, because that is a cultural, that is very difficult to go from, again, that monolithic tool where you get all of your food, your air and water from that tool to, all these connected tools that don't make any sense. Again, if it's too complicated, you're not going to get what your ultimate goal is. And your ultimate goal, I think, is to actually have other people join your cause, right? Especially in the French Revolution sense. You want to get people together and start moving them in that direction together. One of my very favorite quotes along this lines is, in the beginning, and this is Adam Jacob, CTO and founder of Chef, in the beginning, you don't have a scalability problem. You have an adoption problem. So again, under the idea of being a salesperson, you're going to have to sell your ideas in, and don't make it too complicated at the beginning. We're aspirational. We're trying to version control everything. It takes time. This idea of version control everything, it's one of the 5 pillars that was in the DevOps report that Puppet sanctions. I think this one's from 2014, one of the 5 most important characteristics. So again, under the idea of minimum viable process, we could have tried to do all 5 of them, but we said, nope, let's do one. And that one thing, for lack of a better thing, was to version control everything. We used Microsoft TFS because it's what we already had, and there was some familiarity at the company in terms of how we're using it. We had a goal of having 250 artifacts in our first year, but we actually blew that out of the water. By like 7 months in, we were already at 250, and we ended the year at well over 600 artifacts. If you were paying attention at the beginning when I was having my bad demo, you saw that we're using GitLab. Yes, we actually moved to GitLab along the way because the engineer said, hey, this has a lot less friction to use GitLab instead of TFS. That brand new member of the team, that experience being able to get everything spun up in 5 minutes, the equivalent of that took a lot longer, a lot more friction, a lot more points of failure, a lot more difficulty kind of maintaining that. So we moved to GitLab. You probably have heard a lot about Kanban. We did Kanban pretty early in our journey, just in terms of exposing the work. The team that inherited, they were really used to being autonomous and kind of working, in their own little bubbles of their disciplines, and not really, letting other people know what they're working on. So this was a pretty large focus to create transparency, also to try and minimize task switching and WIP, and along the way, we actually did applied some automation to our Kanban practice to, again, make it easier for people to do what you want them to do. And, an example of that is you can create Kanban tasks from the command line in our chat ops, which is pretty nice. You can also close them. You can also report on them. Along the way, and this was one of those serendipitous type of things, we tackled a 3-tier business app, which is very common in the Microsoft world. In our case, my teams were responsible for the DSC provisioning. This was about 60 servers across 6 environments. At the tail end of that, we wanted to bootstrap Chef such that we could actually apply the recipes on those target nodes. The application team, which is our business partner, our customer, they were responsible for installing Ant, Apache, Eclipse, Firefox, Java, Tomcat, and SQL Server. So a lot of things that there's not much evidence of having automated installation routines for, and this was a great success. It was such a great success that the engineer that started it was really disappointed with me the day I said, you know what, great job. If this model makes any sense whatsoever, we should be able to airlift it and hand it off to another engineer, and they should be able to actually move forward with that. They should be able to care and feed for that and actually extend that. And the engineer said, you know what, Scott, I spent so long trying to learn this, and now you're taking it away from me. I said, don't worry. There's plenty of other opportunities in the future. But I think that was a great thing. And the idea of being open-minded, the engineers that were running this, they wanted to have freeze meetings. So 1 week before these environments were being delivered, and they were kind of delivered in a waterfall-esque kind of mode, dev, and then QA, et cetera. They wanted to have freeze meetings. That way they could actually have some stability before delivering those environments to the business team. And I thought about it and said, you know what, that's not strictly a DevOps pattern, but as we heard yesterday in terms of continuous delivery versus continuous deployment and the differences there, if we want to have a little pause and have a week to be able to stabilize things, awesome. We can take those training wheels off later if we need to. Okay, so you're going to get to a point where you want to scale this. So in our case, we are using a homegrown equivalent of HashiCorp's Terraform along with DSC to do our server provisioning. So we're putting Chef on all those nodes. Awesome. And because that is going pretty well, we've actually figured out, we're a VMware shop, we've actually figured out how to exploit the API with vSphere using Power CLI, and we're working on brownfield now. So basically what we want to do, we have the Terraform files, or we call them POS origin files, which are PowerShell files. We have one of those for each server that we want to build. For brownfield, we want to be able to write that file using data that comes off of the API. So we'll basically create the files and then we can ingest them later. So then we'll actually get into a common look and feel for all of our servers, whether they're greenfield or brownfield. We can use that same format for day 0 or day 2, and it builds a lot of consistency into our environment. We're also using pipelines to be able to do this. So in the early days, we had a lot of growing pains because people had different versions of the commandlets. Maybe they hadn't imported them in, and we're changing things so fast. So putting on a pipeline actually brought a lot of stability to our process because we'd have that one place that kind of had all the components working. It's also nice to be able to, I'm going to commit my stuff to Get, I'll go have lunch or I'll go have dinner, and my things will keep on running. I don't need my machine to be online to do that. Okay, so we talked about minimum viable process and product and making things easy to absorb. Along the way, we needed to start building some curious engineers, right? So we're like most shops that we have more work than we know what to do with, and we've kind of gotten out of the habit of looking at information outside of ourselves. So as a thought experiment, I just bought some books, and I put them on the end of a cubicle. You can see we have Lean Enterprise, the Jez Humble and ThoughtWorks book. You also can see the Phoenix Project. You can see Blameless Postmortems by Dave Zweiback. And we have a book, How to Fail at Almost Everything by Scott Adams. So I put these books on the end of the end cap, and you can see there's also a picture of George Clooney if you had very good vision. So George Clooney is sitting there reading a book with a glass of wine. So again, subliminal messaging. We're in the business of selling, and so being able to do that. On the right here, you see one of the engineers. We also sanctioned a couple of series. We did a book series in which everybody read the books and we talked about the book club, and then we had podcast club because adult learners actually absorb information in a variety of different ways. Some people it's books, some people it's blog posts, some people it's podcasts. So being able to hit those different modalities. This is Alice Goldfuss. She's an SRE at New Relic. She had a presentation that was super important to where we're at now. She has Rockstars, Builders, Janitors. I didn't really want to like this presentation because I think sometimes we have rock stars that come in and do a lot of stuff, not documented, not operational, et cetera. But what she's kind of getting at here is with the engineering team, you could do rockstar rotations, which is new work. You could do builder work, which is hardening work. And you could do janitor work, which is break fix. And so what they did at New Relic is they did an experiment to do 2 weeks of new work, 1 week of hardening work or maintenance work, and 1 week of break fix work, and doing rotations. We're actually doing this as an experiment at Columbia at the moment. And it's having some unexpected benefits because we've been documented a lot of the friction items. As we roll into different rotations, remember we have all these different deep specialization disciplines in our team. So as people are handing things off, having that beginner mind and having a different set of eyes looking at the activity gives you an opportunity to identify problems that need to be fixed. We have two teams at this moment. I call them full or stacked teams. So you can see we have storage engineers, database engineers, virtualization engineers, and I've been accused of not valuing specialization. And it's not that I don't value specialization, but I value being able to do automation and being able to make it to where almost anybody in the team could actually use the tooling to accomplish an activity. That should be the litmus test. And what I tell the engineers on the team, we should be trying to reduce friction for ourselves, our business partners at the enterprise. If we're doing one or more of those things, we're doing the right thing. So keep trying to reduce that friction. Okay, so the unexpected serendipitous thing of all this is we've been doing some chat ops, and I promised you a second demo, so let me do that real quick. I'm getting the Oscar music up here. Wrap it up. All right. All right, so what I've got for you here is just a collection of different chat ops scripts. We're basically doing chat ops for almost everything, and this is the surprising part. I'll come into work, and we had a problem the night before, and someone has already created a chat ops script. So in no particular order. So let's see what we're doing here. So we've got things like, hey, return in the cafe menu, get the weather report, get some kind of server information, displaying computer information, getting the AD property. We've got some demos in terms of reports that we've done. And finally, being a 16, we're going to back up a NetScaler load balancer. So let's dive into some of this. If you don't tell the robot that you want to talk to him, okay, Kelsey's got it going on. Okay, so here's the menu from our cafe. Pretty cool. So again, let's reduce the friction for creating. Okay, so this is the forecast for Nashville. Pretty cool. So this is the address of one of our retail servers. This is the information on one of the servers, which I wanted to show you, but I ran out of time. This is a ping for a given server. So think about it. You're at a soccer game, hockey game, whatever kind of game you're at, or you're out with friends, you could actually check on the status of some of your infrastructure. This is an AD user. This is my own personal VDI machine. I'm still getting Oscar music. Let me have just a little bit more time here. So this one is interesting because it generated enough data to where it put into a PDF file. So this is all the different patches that are packaged and available for one of our locations. I'm going to do BNA 16. So we had some interesting challenges with our NetScalers a couple weeks ago. So we did a blameless postmortem, aka retrospective, and one of the things that we said is we wanted to shore up some of our practices with our NetScalers. So that drove this effort to actually, and we'll check in on it in just a second. It should be backing up one of our NetScaler nodes, writing it out to yep. So it just wrote it out. So again, you could actually put this into a pipeline if you had to do some kind of upgrade. So I have more demos. You can find me after the presentation if you want to see more things. Here are some notable milestones that have happened for us. And I will publish the slides. We have the TLDR version if you want even more milestones. And then we have a number of books here. The last thing I'll kind of leave you with, the Microsoft use case is, I think, more difficult than Linux or the cloud version. If we can kind of make notable headway in a lot of these different areas and thinking differently and having ops engineers write chat ops scripts and all the other things like that, I think that you can do the same thing in your own companies and find your mentors that can help you on your journey. So that's my talk.